Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings, where yesterday we started reading a wonderful new book, The Tales of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, by Rabbi Aiden Steinsaltz. Excellent, excellent, excellent work. I hope you're getting a lot out of this. I think this is going to be a wonderful work for sure. And yesterday we read the tale called The Losing of the King's Daughter, or otherwise known as the Lost Princess. Excellent work. And I think today we are on the commentary for that. And it was an intriguing tale for sure. The losing of the king's daughter and the attempt of the king's emissary to get her back, and always the twist of events that hindered him. But it did say in the end, and how he got her out of there, he did not relate. But in the end, he did succeed. So let's see what the commentary has to say. Commentary. The basic narrative of this story is not original. Versions that are similar in both general plot and particular details can be found in the Grimm brothers' tales and in Russian and Ukrainian folklore. Rabbi Nachman adopted this ancient folk tale, made a number of relatively small changes, and created a religious allegory of deep human significance. The transformation is so complete that in his introduction, Nachman could write, "I told this story on the way, and everyone who heard it had thoughts of repentance." Interesting. In Nachman's rendering, the search for the king's daughter is symbolic of the quest to redeem the Shekinah, God's presence in this world. This is a huge concept in Judaism, and if you miss this point, this is, in essence, what is the bride, if you will. The quest to redeem the Shekinah, God's presence in this world, which is held captive by the evil forces, by the forces of evil. The king's chamberlain is symbolic of the people of Israel, or more specifically, of its spiritual leaders. The efforts to save the king's daughter and the various failures are a tragic and poetic depiction of the historical struggles of the Jewish people, externally with the world and internally with its members. The losing of the king's daughter. In Nachman's stories, where there is a king, he frequently represents the supreme king, God himself. This is clearly the case here, as it is also the case that the king's daughter is the Shekinah, who is to a certain extent equivalent to the Knesset Israel, the collective soul of Israel. The 6 sons also reflect certain details of the Kabbalistic picture of the world. The special bond that exists between God and the Shekinah and the Knesset is clearly established in the description of the king's affection for his daughter. The first passage recalls the time when the Shekinah resided in the temple in Jerusalem, and Israel lived in its land in close connection with God. In an unexplained and perhaps inexplicable moment of crisis, the king withholds his paternal care from his daughter, who is immediately snatched away by the powers of evil. The king immediately regrets what he has done and seeks to reestablish the original bond. Such a situation was in fact depicted by the prophet. "For a small moment have I forsaken thee, but with great compassion will I gather thee," from Isaiah 54:7. After the banishment of the Shekinah, the Jewish people, too, must go into exile. Yeah, so you got to gather this point to understand what the Hebrew people are really trying to do. Here, in fact, Nachman has inverted the order of the traditional account in which the Shekinah follows the Jews into exile. That is, the physical banishment precedes the spiritual. As Nachman tells it, the chamberlain makes a voluntary decision to seek out the king's daughter. "Hi, Ashley and Sheila." 2 tasks lie before him as a leader of the people: to help the Jews find their collective soul and to reunite daughter and father. To attain these goals, he is willing to suffer all the tribulations of an almost endless quest. The quest. Stage 1. When the chamberlain sets out, he takes with him no more than the basic necessities. In such a manner, the Jewish people have had to leave their homes on numerous occasions. Oh, the pogroms. Nevertheless, he is accompanied by a servant, symbolic of the simple, innocent people of Israel who seek redemption together with their spiritual leaders, and who frequently have an important role to play. In two of Nachman's stories included in this book, The Merchant and the Pauper and The Master of the Prayer, the simple folk participate actively in the process, but here their role is secondary. After years of searching, the chamberlain finds the king's daughter in the middle of the desert, which is traditionally the abode of the powers of evil, and also, paradoxically, where the divine revelation takes place and the Torah is given. The desert castle in which the daughter is held is described as if it were a regal place. According to the symbolism of the story, this reflects the Kabbalistic idea that the realm of evil resembles the actual world. Nevertheless, it is ultimately illusory, and that's really what we need to understand about being here in the world. It's ultimately illusory, and when our souls separate from our body, we will see this world as a dream. When the chamberlain overcomes his fear of the apparently powerful guards, he can enter unhampered. Evil is a mirror image of reality and has no power or even existence of its own. When a man is aware of the nature of evil, he can enter through its strongholds unharmed. Be bold. The chamberlain penetrates the castle as an onlooker, and as such he sits in the corner. The festivities in the kingdom of evil reach a climax when the queen, who is, of course, the king's daughter, is presented at court. Her regal status reflects the deeper level of significance of the exile of the Shekinah. This is a big point to understand for sure. Not only is she separated from the divine, but she actually supports and sustains evil. In other words, it feeds off of the Shekinah. The Shekinah is, of course, not a willing partner, for she is a captive. The imagery used by the Kabbalah and Hasidism to describe the hold of evil on the Shekinah is frequently powerful and dramatic. The Baal Shem Tov, Nachman's great-grandfather, once said that the battle against evil is decided when one realizes that evil, too, contains something of the divine. That's when a battle is decided. This profound and difficult Hasidic idea, which was frequently misunderstood, is central in this episode. The chamberlain recognizes the king's daughter in the midst of corruption, and at the moment the process of redemption is initiated. The next stage is recognizing him and providing him with the detailed instructions on how he is to rescue her. He is to perform certain tasks that are in fact spiritual exercises, penances, self-mortification, and incessant yearning. The chamberlain's failure is almost inevitable. External evil can be overcome not by force, but only by recognizing the divine within it. Similarly, on the psychological level, the evil within man cannot be suppressed by asceticism and penances. The longer it is repressed, the more the evil inclination grows in strength. The problems that derive from the strong natural desires must be resolved at their source, not at the level at which they are manifest. This is a very, very, very key point. We as human beings always have a terrible tendency to respond at the level they are manifested. It's Rabbi Kaufman used to say often that when a person hits a dog with a stick, the dog bites the stick, goes after the stick. It doesn't understand that there's a driver behind the stick. And we need to understand the same to overcome evil. That the problems that derive from strong natural desires must be resolved at their source, not at the level which they are manifest. Though it is expressed in purely theological terms, this Hasidic idea is similar to modern psychological theories. The Chamberlain's failure is reminiscent of the biblical account of the fall of Adam, who ate the forbidden fruit. Here, the sin is followed by deep sleep, a decline, a kind of spiritual death in which there is no awareness or knowledge of the world. The Talmud describes sleep being 1/60th part of death. There's a surprising element here. The servant who had no aspirations to achieve spiritual greatness experiences no great fall and remains awake to look after the physical needs of the people. The quest, stage 2. When the Chamberlain finally awakens, he appears to have lost all sense of orientation and has to ask the servant what has happened. He returns to the king's daughter and finds her in the same place, for her exile is not yet total. His second task is easier, not to sleep when the great opportunity comes, and not to drink wine, so as not to fall into a drunken slumber in which it would be impossible to distinguish between exile and redemption. The task is easier, but the temptation, when it comes, is subtler, and the Chamberlain succumbs to a species of formalistic reasoning. The commandment he received was quite clear, but he manages to find a caustic way to circumvent it. Once again, he falls into a deep sleep, this time for 70 years, the length of the Babylonian exile, during which it is written, "We were as dreamers. This drunken slumber is so deep that all memory of the redemption is lost." Indeed, not even the appeal of the king's daughter, the direct personal intervention of the Shekinah, can arouse the Chamberlain from his spiritual coma. After this second failure, the situation of the king's daughter is drastically changed and becomes symbolic of the final exile, when all hopes of immediate return are lost. She is banished to an inconceivably remote place. Nevertheless, she leaves the Chamberlain a message, one that he can neither forget nor ignore. The Jewish people receive this letter, written in tears and suffering, which tells them that there is still hope, that the redemption will come, but that it is far off and fantastic. Its beginning will be in a form and a place that are beyond human comprehension and experience, a golden mountain and a castle of pearl. The quest in the final stage. When Abraham was about to climb the mountain to sacrifice his son Isaac and was facing the most terrible test of faith imaginable, he told the servants who had accompanied him on the journey to stay behind. So, too, the Chamberlain, about to go beyond the limits of human experience in search of the Golden Mountain, must go alone. The servant, the common people, endures the physical hardships of exile together with his master, but the latter must bear its spiritual torment and despair alone. This was the way that many Hasidic leaders, and notably Nachman, envisioned their task. They had, on one hand, to direct and comfort their followers, and on the other, to face in isolation the spiritual challenges and existential loneliness of the final stage of the exile. The final stage of the quest can be read at two levels. One geographical, historical, the other spiritual and metaphysical. Nachman frequently used the technique of ambiguous symbolism to present different messages within a single story to audiences of differing degrees of sophistication. At the first level, the quest goes deeper into exile through the centuries, and the giants are the various peoples among whom the Jewish people dwelled, who mocked their hopes and tested their faith. At the second level of significance, this last stage of the quest takes the Chamberlain from the ordinary real world into another dimension of being, to other metaphysical worlds. The Golden Mountain is not marked on any map of the world, but exists in the higher spheres, and it is there that he must solve the problem of redemption. However, the exile of the Shekinah is so deep and abysmal that not even the three giants, angels who rule over three such celestial worlds, can help. It is said that God did not reveal the time of redemption to any of his creatures, not even to the angels. An interesting Jewish idea present in this episode is the status of man in relation to the angels. Man is small, a terrestrial being, whereas the angels are at a higher level in the cosmic scale. Nevertheless, the angels cannot move from their fixed positions. nor can they change their role. Key point. Man, on the other hand, is free in every meaning of the word. The Chamberlain has passed through many stages in his quest, from the first attempts to bring redemption by mortification of the body to the spiritual voyages in which he encounters failure after failure. However, even after the third giant, the angel of the highest world he can reach, can help him no more, and there is apparently no hope, his faith remains unbroken. The road to redemption. At this very point, the ultimate crisis of reality, many seekers after redemption gave up. In the rich vein of literature that deals with redemption, there are frequent descriptions of the time when the Messiah, the son of Joseph, the precursor of the final Messiah, son of David, is killed, Jerusalem is destroyed again, and the few remaining believers flee into the wilderness. This is the moment of the greatest trial of faith, and those who pass it are the remnant who will see the redemption. Once again, good appears from within evil. The tidings that there is indeed a mountain of gold are brought by the very wind that transported the king's daughter to her place of exile, and the giant who had previously declared that the search was futile is willing to help now that there are clear signs that the search can succeed. The description of the Chamberlain's entry into the city is brief, but it is replete with images drawn from messianic texts in the Talmud. The fact that the story does not end and that the actual rescue of the king's daughter is not depicted is typical of Nachman's stories and will be discussed again in later commentaries. At this point, it is sufficient to note that the redemption is a matter of the future, either remote or very close. Wow, what a story and the depth that was in there. Hopefully you picked up some wonderful things, and now we're going on to another tale, The Merchant and the Pauper. Once there lived a merchant, a very rich man who possessed much wealth and many goods. His promissory notes reached every corner of the world. Everything that he desired was his. Nearby dwelt a pauper, a poor man who was in everything just the opposite of the merchant. Neither of them had children. One night the merchant dreamed a dream. Several men came to his house and began to pack up all his possessions. He asked them what they were doing, and they replied that they were taking everything to the pauper who lived nearby. This answer provoked the merchant to great indignation, but since they were many and he was one, there was nothing he could do to stop them. And indeed, they took everything in his house, leaving nothing but bare walls. He was naturally very upset, but when he woke up, he realized it had only been a dream, for thank God his possessions were intact. Nevertheless, from that time on, his heart was ill at ease, for he could not get the dream out of his mind. Even before the dream, the merchant used to look after and assist the pauper and his wife, but now he became even more concerned for their welfare. However, whenever the pauper or his wife came to his home, he recalled the dream and grew afraid, and his countenance changed. Moreover, both the pauper and his wife visited him frequently. One day, the pauper's wife called on him. He gave her whatever she needed, but he was afraid, and his countenance changed. She asked him, "Your Honor, forgive me, but why is it that whenever I or my husband visit you, your countenance changes?" In reply, he told her about the dream and explained that this was why he became anxious every time he saw her or her husband. She asked whether the dream had been on such and such a night, giving a date. "Yes," he answered, "but why do you ask?" She replied, "On that very same night, I too had a dream. I was very wealthy. Several men came into my house and began to pack up all my possessions. I asked them what they were doing, and they told me they were taking everything to the pauper, that is to say, to the rich merchant who was now known as the pauper. So pay no attention to your dream. We all have our dreams." However, after hearing this, the merchant became even more frightened and bewildered, for it seemed that something would really happen, that his wealth and possessions would go to the pauper and that he would inherit the pauper's lot. One day, the merchant's wife went for a drive in a carriage. Among the female companions she took with her was the pauper's wife. A certain general happened to be traveling on the road at the time with a troop of soldiers. When he saw the carriage with its women travelers, he ordered that one of them be brought to him. The woman the soldiers chose was none other than the pauper's wife. They took her to the general's carriage and drove off with her. There appeared to be no way to rescue her, since the general had many soldiers at his command, and he abducted her to his own country. However, she was an upright woman who feared God and would do no wrong, no matter how much they cajoled and implored her. She remained an upright, God-fearing woman, but she wept bitterly. When the merchant's wife and her companions returned home from their drive without the pauper's wife, the unfortunate man was distraught. He wept incessantly and beat his head against the wall, bewailing the loss of his wife. The merchant visited the pauper and asked him why he was weeping so bitterly. The pauper answered, "Why should I not weep? What is left to me? There arose those who have wealth and others who have children, but I had only my wife. Now she has been taken from me. What is left for me?" The merchant was deeply moved, and in the great compassion he felt for the poor man, he did something reckless, even mad. He found out where the general lived and set out to that country. There he performed a most extraordinary deed. He went directly to the general's fortified residence, and, despite the guards that were posted all about, walked straight in. The guards were so startled by his impudence that they were incapable of action and did not stop him. And he, in turn, did not even look at them. He went into the general's quarters, straight up to where the pauper's wife lay sleeping, woke her up, and said, "Come." She was very frightened when she saw him, but he calmed her, telling her that she must leave with him immediately. Only when they had left and had passed by all the guards on the way out did he realize how reckless he had been. It was truly a rash deed, and there was certain to be great outcry. Shortly the alarm was raised, and together they hid for 2 days in a cistern full of rainwater, till the danger had passed. The pauper's wife was deeply moved by the great devotion the merchant was showing her, and by the trials and tribulations he was enduring because of her. And she swore by God that whatever good fortune might be in time be hers, she would deny him nothing. Whatever he desired of her future good fortune or prosperity, she would give him, even if by so doing she would become poor again. Now such an oath must be witnessed, and she made the very cistern in which they were hiding her witness. 2 days later they emerged and journeyed until they came to another place where he realized they were still being pursued. This time they found huge refuge in a bathing place. Once again she marked this devotion and the trials and tribulations he was enduring because of her. And once again she swore that if fortune ever favored her, she would deny him nothing. This time she called upon the reservoir as her witness. They remained there, too, for about 2 days, and then they continued on their journey. When the merchant discovered that their pursuers had once more caught up with them, they hid again. This happened 7 times. 7 times they were in danger, and 7 times they concealed themselves by water, in a cistern, in a bathing place, by a lake, in a spring, a creek, a river, and a sea. And in each place of concealment she noted his devotion and the trials and tribulations he was enduring because of her. And she swore her oath and called on the place itself as a witness. This happened 7 times until they came to the sea. The merchant was a great trader and knew the routes across the sea, and so they returned quickly to their own country, where he restored the pauper's wife to her husband. Thereupon there was great rejoicing. In reward for his extraordinary deed and for having withstood temptation with another man's wife, God gave the merchant a son born that very year. The pauper's wife, too, was rewarded for having withstood temptation with the general and with the merchant, and she gave birth to a daughter. This girl was extremely beautiful. Her beauty was sublime, unlike that found among mortals, and people used to say, "May she be spared, for such a phenomenal child is raised with difficulty." Such beauty and splendor had never been seen by man before. People used to come from afar just to look upon her and showered her many gifts of affection. These gifts were so numerous that before long the pauper became rich. It occurred to the merchant that she should arrange a match between his son and the pauper's daughter, because of her great and unique beauty. This, he thought, might be the significance of the dreams in which all of his possessions were transferred to the pauper and those of the pauper to him. Were the children joined in marriage, the two families would be united. One day the pauper's wife came to visit the merchant, and he told her of his desire to arrange a match and thereby perhaps fulfill their dreams. She answered, "I too have considered this, but I did not dare to raise the subject. If, however, it is your desire too, I am certainly willing. I shall deny you nothing. Have I not sworn that all my good fortune will always be at your disposal?" The son and the daughter studied together, learning languages and arts and sciences. The daughter's beauty continued to grow. People continued to visit her just to look upon her beauty, and the gifts they brought made the pauper a very rich man. Even the nobility came to see her, and in their eyes, too, her beauty was unique. It was no mortal loveliness. These nobles began to consider the possibility of arranging a match with the pauper, and there was one in particular who wished to pledge his son to the beautiful daughter. However, nobility cannot intermarry with common folk, and so they sought to raise the pauper's status by arranging for him to go into service with the emperor. At first he was a sergeant, but he was rapidly promoted. So many noblemen were interested in his advancement that he rose swiftly through the ranks. All wished to make a match with him, and all sought his promotion. Nevertheless, as his daughter was engaged to another, he could not conclude a match, and the matter was left conveniently open. Eventually, he became a general. He succeeded so well that the emperor sent him to fight wars, and he was victorious every time. He became a very high and mighty person. When the emperor died, the council of the people assembled and prospered him as the new ruler, whereupon the nobles convened and appointed him emperor. The new emperor went on to fight many wars and conquer many lands. After a while, other countries came to hear of his great success. They began to surrender to him voluntarily because all the beauty and all the good fortune in the world appeared to be with him. Eventually, all the kings in the world convened and decided that he should rule over them. They made him emperor over the whole world, and they gave him a document inscribed with letters of gold. The emperor was no longer willing to keep the promise of a marriage bond with the merchant's family. It is fitting that an emperor should give his daughter to the son of a Is it fitting that an emperor should give his daughter to the son of a merchant? On the other hand, his wife, now empress, refused to withdraw from the agreement. When the emperor saw that he would not be able to arrange an alternative match for his daughter as long as the merchant stood in his path, all the more so since his wife remained loyal, he began to devise means of getting rid of him. First, he intrigued by plot and deceit to impoverish him. It was not difficult for the emperor to do this, and shortly the merchant started to lose money and become a pauper. Even so, the empress remained steadfast in her pledge. The emperor then realized that he would not be able to make another match for his daughter as long as the merchant's son was alive, and he devised means to dispose of him. He had the young man brought to trial and told the judges what the verdict and sentence he wanted. The merchant's son was accordingly condemned to be tied up in a sack and cast into the sea. The empress was deeply grieved, but she was powerless to act against the emperor. So she went to the officials whose task it was to carry out the sentence and fell at their feet and implored them for her sake, to spare the young man. What had he done to deserve death? She begged them to let the innocent young man go free and to cast some other condemned prisoner who truly deserved such a fate into the sea in his place. Her pleading was successful, and they swore to her that they would do as she asked. Accordingly, they cast someone else into the sea and released the young man, telling him to make his escape immediately. And so the merchant's son, now grown up, went into exile. Even before this happened, the empress had told her daughter that the merchant's son was her appointed bridegroom. The mother told her daughter the whole story of what had befallen her, of how the merchant had shown such devotion and had endured hardships and danger for her sake. He was with me in 7 places of concealment, and in each of them I swore by God that I would never withhold from him anything that belonged to me. I called on each of these 7 places of water as a witness. You are now all my success and my good fortune, and it is clear that you are his, and he is yours. However, your father has been blinded by pride and seeks to have the young man killed. Even so, my daughter, you must always remember that he is your appointed bridegroom, and never agree to another in his place." The daughter was a God-fearing person, and she took her mother's words to heart, promising to honor the pledge. She sent the merchant's son a letter to the effect that she regarded herself as betrothed to him and him alone as her bridegroom. She also sent him a map that she had drawn, showing all the places in which her mother had hidden with his father, the 7 witnesses to her mother's oath, the cistern, the reservoir, and the others. She charged him to take great care of this document, which she signed with her name. After the merchant's son had been set free by those appointed to put him to death, he set out on his travels. After some time, he reached the sea and set sail. A tempest arose and drove his ship onto a desert coast, where it was wrecked. However, all the passengers were saved and went ashore. As the coast was remote from all shipping routes, so that no help could be expected from the sea, the survivors separated, each one making his own way in search of food and water. The young man also set out into the wilderness. He walked farther and farther from the shore, until he could no longer return. The more he tried to find his way back, the deeper he wandered into the wilderness, until he realized there was no return. He had a bow and arrow with which to defend himself against the wild beasts of the wilderness, and he found sufficient food. Eventually, he emerged from the desert, and he reached a place that was habitable, but in which no one lived. Water was there in abundance, and trees that bore fruit. He decided to settle there, for it would be difficult to return to civilization. Since there was fruit to eat and water to drink, he could shoot an occasional hare or deer with his bow for meat, and even catch delicious fish in the stream. It seemed an excellent place to spend the rest of his life. The emperor, believing that the sentence had been carried out and that the merchant's son was no longer alive, felt he could now proceed to arrange a suitable match for his daughter, and negotiations began with various kings. He built a suitable royal court for her, and she lived there with the nobles' daughters she had chosen to be her companions. She spent her time playing various musical instruments, rejecting all ideas of a negotiated match, and insisting that each and every suitor come to her in person. The emperor's daughter was very proficient in the art of poetry. A special podium was constructed on which the royal suitors stood when they declaimed their poems of love and desire, each one with his own words of love. To some she sent an answer, also in verse and in words of affection, through one of her noble companions. To others, who pleased her more, she herself declaimed the verses of her affectionate reply. And to those who pleased her more, she showed herself and let them look upon her face, and she answered. However, she rejected them all, ending her answer with the words that none understood. But the waters have not passed over you. The suitors to whom she revealed her face were overwhelmed by her beauty. Some would swoon, whereas others went mad with love. Kings continued to seek her hand, and nevertheless to all of them she gave the same reply. The merchant's son settled down in his deserted spot. He, too, was proficient in verse and learned in the art of music. He found suitable wood and fashioned musical instruments and made strings from an animal gut, and he played and sang to himself. Occasionally he would take out the letter from the emperor's daughter and play and sing, recalling everything that had befallen him from the time that his father had been rich merchant to his exile in this place. One day he went into the forest, selected a tree, and made a mark on it. Then he carved out a hollow and hid the letter in it and stayed there for a while. Sometime later, a great tempest felled all the trees in the forest, and he could no longer find the one in which he had hidden the letter. When the forest had been intact, he could recognize his own tree by the mark he had made. But now that it was one among a fallen, broken multitude, this was no longer possible. It was not feasible to split open all the trees in order to find the letter, for there were too many. He was grief-stricken and wept greatly. He realized that were he to remain there, he would go mad with regret and sorrow, and so he decided to leave. No matter what might happen to him on the way, it would be more dangerous for him to dwell there in his grief. He packed some meat and fruit in his knapsack and set out on his way, making marks to show him the way back. After a while, he reached a town, and he asked in which country he was. The people told him, and he asked if they knew anything about the emperor. They said that they did, and then he inquired about the emperor's beautiful daughter, and they replied that they had heard about her, and that no suitor could win her hand in marriage. Since he could not go to her in person, he approached the king of that country and told him the whole story, that he was the true bridegroom of the emperor's daughter, and that this was the reason for her refusing to marry anyone else. Since he himself could not go near the emperor's court, he would give the king certain signs, like the 7 places of water that the king might go, and arrange the marriage with her, for which he would be properly compensated. The king recognized that the young man was speaking the truth, for such a story could hardly be contrived, and so he accepted the mission. However, he realized that it would not be to his benefit to bring the daughter back with the young man still there. On the other hand, he was not inclined to have him killed, for after all, the young man had done him a favor. So the king decided to exile him to another land about 200 miles distant. The young man was very vexed that he had been banished just because of the good deed he had done for the king. So he went to the king of the second country, and to him, too, he told the entire story, giving him the signs, but in greater detail, and urging him to set out immediately in order to reach the emperor's daughter before the first king. Even were he to get there after the first, his signs would be more convincing. However, the second king thought like the first, and he, too, exiled the young man to a land 200 miles away. The merchant's son was very vexed, and he approached a third king, to whom he gave even more signs and proofs, including instructions on how to draw the map of the 7 places of concealment. But this king, too, thought like the others and sent the young man 200 miles away. Meanwhile, the first king traveled quickly and called the emperor's daughter. He composed a poem skillfully introducing in it all the places of water, that is, the 7 witnesses to the mother's oath. However, he arranged the names as they sounded best to him, according to the rules of poetry, rather than in the correct order. The emperor's daughter was astonished to hear the 7 secret places mentioned, and she thought that he was indeed her bridegroom. He had indeed failed to mention the places in their proper order, and that caused her some difficulty, but she thought that it could probably be attributed to the requirements of art and prosody. So she decided that he was the one. She wrote him a note saying that she accepted his suit. There was much rejoicing and excitement at the news that the beautiful daughter had found herself a groom, and preparations were begun for the wedding. Meanwhile, the second king, who had been given more signs by the merchant's son, made haste and arrived at the royal residence. When he was told that she had already chosen a bridegroom, he paid no attention, saying that he had something to say that would certainly succeed. They let him present his suit, and in his poem he gave all the places in the proper order, and furthermore added one more sign. She asked him how the first king, too, had known the signs, but since he could not tell the truth, he said he did not know. All this was most strange to her, and she wondered how the first king had known the places that no man could possibly guess. Nevertheless, she decided that the second king must be her bridegroom, since he had given the places in the correct order with an additional sign. She thought that the first king had probably uttered the places as poetic fancy without knowing what they meant.
Meanwhile, the third king, who had been given even more convincing signs and also a map, made haste and presented himself as a prospective groom. He, too, was told that she had already made her choice, but he said he had something that would certainly succeed. And so the third king entered and recited his poem with its even more convincing signs, and then showed her the copy of the map. She was now completely bewildered and at a loss. The first and second kings had also mentioned the places, and she therefore declared that she would believe no one who did not bring her own letter. The merchant's son grew weary of being sent away time after time, and decided to present himself before the emperor's daughter. Perhaps he would succeed by himself. When at last he arrived, he told her companions that he too had something to tell her that would certainly succeed. They let him in too, and he recited his poem. The signs he cited were even more convincing than those of the others, and in addition he reminded her of their youth and how they had studied together in the same class. He told her how, in fact, he himself had sent the three kings after he had lost the original letter in the tree, but she was so confused that she refused to heed what he said. After all, the other kings had also made excuses about why they did not have the original letter, and after many years she could not possibly recognize him. In fact, she decided not only to rely on the signs. From now on, she would only accept her own letter. Realizing that he could do nothing to convince her, the merchant's son decided to return to his place in the wilderness and to spend the rest of his life there. He was dismayed by the people in the world and thought that it was better to live out his remaining years in solitude. So he wandered around for several years until he found his way back to his place in the desert and settled there, eating the fruit of the trees as before. Now there was a murderous scoundrel who lived on the sea. When this murderer heard of the existence of the wondrous beauty, he sought to capture her. He did not want her for himself, being a eunuch, but thought that he would be able to sell her to a king for a large sum of money. He was an unprincipled scoundrel and, like all murderers, quite unconcerned about what would happen to him if he failed. He began to take the necessary steps to implement his scheme. First, he bought a huge amount of goods of magnificent quality and variety, and he made birds of gold so artfully contrived they seemed actually to be alive, and prepared stalks of gold as purchase. Such large birds standing on thin stalks that did not break appeared to be a great wonder. In addition, he contrived to make it appear that they were singing, one clucking with its beak, another whistling, and another trilling. It was, in fact, all a clever trick. Concealed actors made the appropriate sounds, and the birds were moved by strings. Then the murderer set sail with his cargo. When he reached the land where the emperor's daughter resided, he dropped anchor and presented himself as a great merchant with many goods to sell. People came on board his ship to buy many kinds of precious objects. He remained there for some time, 3 months or more, and all the while the townsfolk came to buy from him, and they showed what they had purchased to others. The emperor's daughter also desired to purchase something. So she sent him a note, inviting him to bring her some of his goods. He replied that it was not his practice to bring merchandise to the buyer, and anyone who wished to purchase from him, even an emperor's daughter, would have to come to him. Nobody could force him to act otherwise. The emperor's daughter decided to go to him. As was her custom on leaving the palace, she veiled her face, lest anyone who saw her beauty be smitten by it and fall in a swoon. Together with some of her companions and a guard, she visited the merchant, who was none other than the murderous scoundrel, and purchased various objects. When they departed, the merchant told her that if she came again, he would show her even more beautiful objects, wonderful and rare. She visited the merchant again, buying things. After a while, she became a regular visitor to the ship. One day he opened the special chamber where the golden birds were standing, and when she saw them, she was overcome with amazement. The soldiers and her companions also wanted to look, but he refused to let them, telling her, "No, I won't show them to anybody but you, for you are the emperor's daughter." So she went in by herself, but he followed her, locked the door, overpowered her, and put her into a sack. Then he stripped her stripped off her clothes and gave them a sailor to wear, also making him veil his face. He pushed the sailor out and told him to leave. The sailor had no idea what was happening, and he walked off the ship. The soldiers and companions who were waiting for the emperor's daughter joined him, and he followed them to the palace, where his face was unveiled, and there was a great commotion and furor. The sailor was slapped on his face, but it was clear that he knew nothing and was not guilty. They threw him out. The murderer, knowing well that they would be pursued, left the ship with the emperor's daughter and hid together with her in a cistern until the danger had passed. Beforehand, he had charged the sailors on the ship to raise anchor and set sail immediately, reassuring them that the pursuers would not shoot at a ship in which they thought the emperor's daughter was held captive. Actually, he did not care if the ship was intercepted. Like all reckless scoundrels, he was indifferent to what befell him or anyone else. And so it was. The alarm was raised and the pursuit was given. The ship was caught, but of course the emperor's daughter was not on it. Hiding with her in the cistern, the murderer warned her to make no noise or call for help. I have risked my life to capture you. If I lose you, my life will be worth nothing. So I have no scruples, and if you make the slightest sound, I shall strangle you at once. Come what may, I know how little I am worth, and I don't care what happens to me. The emperor's daughter was mortally afraid and kept silent. When they left the cistern, they roamed in the city until once more they were in danger of being discovered, whereupon they hid in another place of water, a bathing place. This was repeated 7 times, in the very same 7 kinds of places of concealment in which the merchant had once hidden with her mother. They were the places of water that were witnesses to her mother's oath: a cistern, a bathing place, a lake, a spring, a creek, and a river, and eventually they came to the sea. There he found a small fishing vessel and set sail with her. He did not desire her for himself, being a eunuch, but he wished to sell her to a king. Fearing that she would be recognized, he dressed her as a sailor so that she looked like a man. Thus they crossed the sea. A tempest arose and tossed the fishing vessel onto the shore, breaking it up completely. Now the shore was none other than the desert land upon which the young man had once been shipwrecked, and where he had found himself a place to live. The murderer, who was acquainted with shipping routes, knew that no vessels visited that shore. He thus knew that there was no danger of discovery, and he let her walk by herself. They each went in search of food, and the emperor's daughter managed to elude him. As soon as the scoundrel realized that she was out of sight, he began to shout. She did not answer, realizing that there was no need. Were he to discover her, she would always pretend that she had not heard him. As his aim was to sell her, he would have nothing to gain by killing her. So she kept quiet and eluded him. The murderer searched for her in vain, and eventually he was devoured by wild beasts. She wandered on, finding food on the way. After a while, she reached the place where the young man, the merchant's son, had settled. She was unkempt and dressed like a sailor, and they did not recognize each other. Still, she was very happy to have someone to talk to. He asked the apparent sailor, "How did you get here?" She answered, "I was with a merchant at sea, and we were shipwrecked." He told her that he too had been with a merchant at sea and had been shipwrecked, and the two of them lived there together. The empress was grief-stricken by her daughter's abduction. She beat her head against the wall and blamed her husband, the emperor, saying that because of his pride he had killed the young man, and now he had lost their daughter. She wept, saying that their daughter had been all their good fortune and prosperity, and now she was gone. "What is left to me?" she moaned. The emperor was already grieved at the loss of his daughter, and her accusations added much to the anger and strife between them. He grew so furious that he decided to get rid of her. Accordingly, he arranged for a court of justice to banish her. When the emperor next sent his armies to war, they failed him. He placed the blame on the general, saying that the war had been lost because of his mistakes. The general was banished. Then once again he sent his armies, and once again they failed. And yet another general was banished. In this way, several generals were dismissed. The citizens soon realized that this strange things were happening, that the emperor had banished the first empress and then all the generals. and they thought that perhaps it should have been the other way around. Accordingly, they banished the emperor and restored the empress and the generals. The empress' first act as a ruler was to send for the merchant and his wife and have them brought to live in the palace. When the emperor was dismissed, he pleaded to be given his liberty. I have been your emperor, and I have done many good things, so have mercy on me and let me be free to move about in my exile. I shall never return, and you need have no fear of me. Let me go and live the rest of my days in peace. So the emperor, too, went into exile. At long last he reached the sea and set sail. A tempest arose and cast him onto the very same shore upon which his daughter had been shipwrecked. He walked through the desert until he reached the place where the merchant's son and his own beautiful daughter, now dressed as a sailor, were living together. They did not recognize each other, for several years had elapsed, and their hair, too, had grown long and wild. They asked him how he had come there, and he told them that he had been traveling with a merchant and had been shipwrecked. They told him that was how they, too, had come to be there. Thus the three of them lived there together, eating of the fruit of the trees and drinking from the stream. They made music for each other, for each was able to play instruments. The young man was the strongest and most capable, for he had been there the longest, so he hunted and brought them meat. They burned wood, which in towns is more precious than gold. The young man sought to prove that this was the best place to spend the rest of their days, in the wilderness. It was a much better life than that pursued in towns and cities, he said. They asked him what kind of life he had led before coming here, and enabled him to state that this life was better. He told them that he had been the son of a rich merchant and had everything that he desired, but here, too, he had everything he wanted, and he continued to prevail upon them to spend the rest of their lives where they were. The emperor asked him whether he had heard about the emperor, to which the young man replied that he had. Then the emperor asked whether he had heard about the emperor's beautiful daughter. This time, too, the young man replied that he had. He became very angry, declaring that the emperor was a murderer. He did not know, of course, that he was speaking to the emperor himself. The emperor asked why, and the young man said that he was there because of the emperor's cruelty and pride. The emperor asked how this was so, and since the young man had nothing to fear, he told the whole story of what had befallen him. Previously, he had only said that he was a merchant's son. The emperor asked him, "Were the emperor to fall into your hands now, would you take revenge on him?" "No," he answered, "for he was a merciful man. On the contrary, I would look after him just as I am taking care of you." The emperor then began to bemoan all the evil and bitterness that had befallen the emperor. For he had heard, so he said, that his beautiful daughter had been abducted and he himself banished. The merchant's son said that it was because of the emperor's cruelty and pride that he had lost his daughter and had been banished himself, and that, for the same reason, he, the young man, had found his way here. It was all the emperor's own fault. Whereupon the emperor asked him again, "Were that emperor here, would you revenge yourself on him?" And again the young man answered that he would not. "I would look after him just as I'm taking care of you." Then the emperor revealed that he was himself none other than the emperor, and he told him everything that had befallen him. The young man took him in his arms, embraced him, and kissed him, while the beautiful daughter, who was disguised as a sailor, looked on and listened to all that passed between them. Every day the young man was wont to go out to the forest to search for the hidden letter. There were thousands upon thousands of trees, and each day he went out and cut a mark on the 3 trees in which he had searched that day. When he returned, his eyes were always tearful from weeping. They asked him what he was seeking that brought him back with tearful eyes, and he told them the entire story of the letter and the emperor's daughter had sent him, of how he had hidden it in a tree for safekeeping, and how the tempest had utterly changed the appearance of the forest. He was still searching for the letter and still hoped to find it. Then they said to him, "Tomorrow we will come to search with you. Perhaps we will be successful." So they began to accompany him to the forest, and each of them searched among the trees until one day the emperor's daughter found the letter. She saw that it was indeed the letter she had sent him, in her own handwriting. However, she felt that it would be dangerous were she to reveal everything at once. Were she suddenly to disclose her identity, remove her disguise, and reappear in her former beauty, the shock would be too much for the young man, and he might faint or die. Furthermore, she wanted to be married properly, so they could not stay in the wilderness. So she gave him the letter, merely telling him where she had found it. He fainted, but then revived, and there was much rejoicing among them. Afterward, however, the young man said, "What do I need the letter for now? Where can I find her? She is certainly with some king by now. What do I need it all for anyways? I shall spend the rest of my life here." So he returned the letter to her, saying, "Here, you take the letter, find her, and marry her," for she was dressed as a man. She let herself be persuaded, but begged him to accompany her, saying, "I shall surely find her, and it will go well with me. But I should like to share my good fortune with you." The young man saw that she, whom he thought to be a sailor, was very clever and was sure to win the emperor's daughter. So he was pleased to accompany him, that is, the emperor's daughter. The emperor wanted to remain there alone, for he was afraid to return to that land over which he had once ruled, but the sailor, that is, his daughter, persuaded him to come along too. Were he to win the beautiful maiden, there would be nothing to fear. The wheel of fortune would be reversed, and the emperor restored. So the three of them set out on and hired a ship. They crossed the sea and came to the land where the empress ruled. And they approached the city. The daughter thought that were she to reveal herself to her mother too suddenly, the shock would be too much. So she first sent the empress a message that someone had arrived with information about her daughter. Then the daughter went in person and told the empress everything that had befallen her daughter. At the end of the daughter said, "And she is here." Then she told the truth. "It is I am your daughter." She also told her mother that her bridegroom, the merchant's son, was there too. In addition, she said that she wanted her father restored to his country. At first, her mother would not hear of it, as she was still angry at him for having been the cause of all the trouble. But for her daughter's sake, she agreed. First, however, it would be necessary to find him, and nobody knew where he was. Then the daughter said, "He too is here, together with us." Then the merchant's son and the beautiful daughter were wed, and the happiness was complete. The new couple received the kingdom and the empire, and they ruled over the whole world. Amen. What a beautiful story. All right, you ready for the commentary? Okay, commentary. The plot of The Merchant and the Pauper is largely an original creation, though certain folk elements from various sources have been skillfully woven into the narrative. In its literary form and structure, it is more polished than the preceding tale. A single narrative line runs from beginning to end, and sub-themes flow smoothly into the development of the main plot. The Merchant and the Pauper is one of Nachman's heavily allegorical stories. As in The Losing of the King's Daughter, the basic theme is the redemption and the processes that lead up to it. But here, greater emphasis is placed on the personality of the Messiah. The major theological issue that underlie the story concern the relationship between the Jewish people as a whole, the Knesset Israel, the collective soul of Israel identified with the Shekinah, and the first and final redeemers. The Merchant and the Pauper, the first two characters to be introduced, represent specific historical personalities, but they are also an essential part of the symbolic fabric of the story. The merchant is the whole man whose wealth is both worldly and spiritual, while the pauper is the man who remains poor in spirit even after he has attained material success. The one is noble, possessing an abundance of spiritual values, and the other a simple man of the people. The dreams of the merchant and the pauper's wife and their fulfillment fit into this typology and reflect a Hasidic notion that in certain generations the base are raised up both materially and spiritually, while the spiritually great are cast down. The pauper's wife embodies the positive aspects of the poor. modesty, innocence, and loyalty to values and relationships in changing circumstances. On the allegorical level, she represents the simple people of Israel, and the adventures that befall her echo the events of Jewish history. At the beginning of the story, she is abducted by the general. This is the first captivity, the exile in Egypt. The merchant, who is represents the historical Moses, feels obliged to save the woman, that is, the children of Israel. The historical mission to enable the whole people to slip out of Egypt appeared to be impractical and beyond human capabilities. Indeed, it was conceived and executed almost recklessly, with no real weighing of alternatives or planning for contingencies in the desert. It came about as a result of individuals' irresponsible impulse rather than by popular demand. Emergence from exile is fraught not only with physical danger, but also with spiritual perils, such as the temptation to return to the flesh pots of Egypt and repeat the incident of the golden calf. The Exodus must therefore proceed by a long, circuitous route. It is a vast drama that involves, on a human level, stages of purification and increasing commitment, and on the divine level, revelation and concealment. In the biblical account of the Exodus, the children of Israel go from one watering place to another and make 7 different passages of water from the Red Sea to the Jordan, at each of which an event renews the bond and covenant between Savior and saved. In the symbolism of the Kabbalah, each station represents one of the 7 lower Sephirot, and the water itself is the divine plenty. In Nachman's story, the Exodus is retold in allegory, and the 7 pledges made by the pauper's wife to remember the rescue are symbolic both of the eternal covenant between Israel and God and of the bond between Redeemer and redeemed. The children born to the 2 couples are the central characters in the allegory, and their significance is to be understood in the terms of the Kabbalah. The pauper's daughter is the Knesset Israel, the Shekinah, the presence of God in the world. Whereas the mother is Israel, as seen in her simplicity and poverty, is the glory of Israel. Poverty, the daughter, is the glory of Israel, the symbol of all that the Shekinah can bestow on humanity. Let me reread that. Whereas the mother is Israel, as seen in her simplicity and poverty. The daughter is the glory of Israel, the symbol of all that the Shekinah can bestow on humanity. The merchant's son is clearly the Messiah. This connection between Moses and the Messiah, the first and the final redeemers, is ancient and well established in many Jewish sources. There are thus 2 aspects, 2 manifestations of Israel: the lowly pauper's wife and her beautiful daughter. The Shekinah is the source of all life, and all men wish to enjoy her beauty. At her advent in the world, she is adored by and enthralls all mankind. Jews and Gentiles alike, everyone wishes to participate in the wondrous revelation. Paradoxically, at this critical stage of history, it is not the person of noble spirit, the merchant, who is raised up, but the poor and simple man, the father of the Shekinah. The merchant is given no post in this new state of affairs, and consequently he loses his wealth, while his son, the future Messiah, is perceived as a threat by the new emperor. This ignoble character achieves worldly power and glory by means of the divine splendor of his daughter. So you see how the daughter's father in this case is kind of how evil tries to suck from the Shekinah, if you will, draw its sources. It's opportunistic, if you will. Having attained external wealth, the pauper loses interest in true salvation and tries to discourage contact between the Knesset Israel and the Messiah. Sovereignty over the physical world is enough for him. That's what happens. Yeah, people get deluded by the things of this world. The pauper's wife, as I have noted, represents another side of the simple person. Even as the highly placed wife of the emperor, she retains her innocence and remains loyal to her pledge to the first Savior. Furthermore, she makes her daughter a party to it by having her promise to be faithful to the merchant's son, the future Savior. The pledge the daughter grants him, the sign by which she will recognize him, is the memory of the first salvation. The final salvation reflects and completes the first. That's a big statement there. The merchant's son possesses the only copy of this written pledge, which is not the folk memory of the Exodus, but rather an esoteric encoded document, and thus he alone can learn the secrets of her soul and the means to bring about her redemption. Give you insight into messianic function. The concept of the exiled Messiah is known in many Jewish sources, but in the form in which it is retold here, many of the details have clear Kabbalistic connotations. The storm that carries the Messiah off is a symbol of the forces of evil, and the place of his refuge reflects the Kabbalistic idea that the soul of the Messiah resides in the Garden of Eden until the time comes for him to appear. The theme of the many suitors wooing the apparently abandoned princess is a relic of numerous folktales, but here it is invested with symbolic significance and associations. The great men of all generations have sought to approach the Shekinah, but with limited success. Some suitors are denied permission even to enter into her presence. Others, in language reminiscent of a famous Talmudic text dealing with the mystic knowledge, enter, gaze upon her, but are stricken with madness. Even those who are worthy of looking upon the divine presence soon proceed no further, for they have not reached the stature of the Messiah. The merchant's son is reluctant to leave the Garden of Eden unless he is certain that he will be able to find the beautiful daughter. His reluctance must be overcome. Paradoxically, it is the forces of evil, the storm, that uproot the trees of Eden, thereby activating him and initiating the beginning of the redemption. The precious pledge is lost, and he has to try to redeem the princess without it. However, he is forced to reveal part of his secret, though not the actual pledge, to certain people who usurp his trust and present themselves as the daughter's betrothed. And that is how witchcraft functions. Sorcery. This episode is an allegorical account of the various messianic figures who have crossed the stage of Jewish history, frequently with disastrous results. Possessing part of the secret signs and perhaps some aspect of messiahship, each was able for a time to persuade the people, including the leaders, that he was indeed the Redeemer. A famous example is that of the sage Rabbi Akiva, who was convinced that Bar Kokhba, leader of the revolt against the Romans in 135, was the Messiah king. Till Bar Kokhba was killed, of course. Each of the personalities in the story was requested to help in bringing about the redemption, but instead each attempted to usurp the Redeemer's role for himself. Vainglorious, people, missing the whole point, chasing their own honor. In a tantalizing detail, Nachman seems to imply that the true Messiah has indeed come once, only to be rejected, to whom he was referring. Who among the false messiahs was the true one? The moral of this section is clear. Neither charismatic personality nor partially fulfilled prophecies are acceptable as proof of the Messiah's identity. Only unequivocal documentary evidence will serve. According to much Jewish thought, especially as developed in Kabbalah, the redemption will not come as the result of a single act or move of the Messiah, but through a dialectic process in which the Shekinah, the Knesset Israel, in this story, the daughter, must seek him out. The daughter, as it were, must activate her Redeemer. In the first stage, she must pass through suffering, oppression, and exile, though the tribulations she must endure reflect to a certain degree those of her mother. Their content and purpose are entirely different. The mother's route is through purification and commitment, while the daughter is drawn into degradation and isolation. This is what the Kabbalah describes as the descent necessary for the ultimate ascent. A dialectic that describes both cosmic processes and the cycles of the human soul. The scoundrel who carries off the daughter is a personification of evil. Not only is he a murderer, but he also makes a living from death and thus can be identified with the Satan in his role as the angel of death. One of the characteristics of evil is that it has no creative power, and thus the scoundrel is a eunuch. He desires the daughter not for love or even lust, but in order to exploit her beauty by selling her for a high price. Evil is essentially parasitic. The technique by which the scoundrel lures the daughter into his cabin is typical of the way evil tempts man. Beginning with trifles, transactions of little significance, it draws man on through better bargains to the promised ultimate marvel, which is in fact an illusion and a fraud. But by the time this is discovered, it's too late to turn back. At the beginning of her exile, the daughter is stripped of her magnificent garments, her outer manifestations, and is wrapped in sack, mark of the lowest level of being. Furthermore, the scoundrel fashions a substitute. Instead of the Shekinah inner glory, he takes a sailor, a role lacking ultimate significance, and clothes him in her garments. It is the nature of evil to extract the inner content and replace it with a void, thereby creating a false mystery. What a statement. It is the nature of evil to extract the inner content and to replace it with a void, thereby creating a false mystery. This spurious manifestation of holiness can be successful only temporarily, but still long enough for the servants to be decoyed and the scoundrel to make his escape. The sailor is clearly not the author of the deception and is set free with only token reproof. Paradoxically, when the scoundrel finally reaches what would seem to be his true environment, the wilderness, he is defeated and the process of redemption of ascent begins. The daughter has reached the depths of her degradation. She can descend no more, and thus evil can no longer exert power over her. It's where humility comes in for sure. The scoundrel is essentially a parasite, and once separated from her, he loses the source of his life. Evil draws all its sustenance by attaching itself to holiness, and if severed from it, perishes. Thus, when the scoundrel is left alone, the wild beasts devour him. The role of the daughter is no longer passive. She becomes an active agent in the process of redemption and now must take the initiative. In the symbolism of the story, this transformation in her nature is reflected in her being dressed in the garments of a man. However, even her eventual discovery of the merchant's son in the Garden of Eden cannot bring about the redemption. Until the corruption and disharmony in the world order have been put right, she cannot reveal herself to him. Glad you're enjoying it, Dan. The emperor is spiritually obtuse and never realizes that the beauty of his daughter is the source of his power. When she is lost and his fortunes decline, he typically blames and punishes others for his failures. Finally, he too is banished and makes his way into the wilderness for the denouement. He now hands sovereignty over to his wife, the Empress. An essential component of the process of redemption is action from below, the contribution of the common folk. The Savior appears to have despaired of his task of salvation and to have relinquished hope of changing the outer world. For him will suffice a life of wholeness and simplicity in which he can burn wood, which in towns is more precious than gold. He even tries to persuade his companions to accept this life in the wilderness. This undefined dream world would, or where there is indeed no salvation, but neither is there the tribulation of exile. That's the way bounded rationality works in humans. We often select suitable decisions rather than optimal decisions. This lack of interest in personal success and achievement is apparently a necessary stage in his development. He is, however, not entirely passive, and when in due course the identity of the banished emperor is revealed, he effects a reconciliation. This is necessary because even though the emperor no longer wields power, he still has a role to play in the life of his daughter and indeed of the people. The Messiah continues his search for the document that is the key to salvation. Ultimately, though, it is not he, but the daughter who finds it, and it is also she who makes all the active preparations for the redemption. Big points, just such huge, profound points that start to pull theological ideas together. The alienation of exile comes to an end, and the divine plan for the human existence is implemented. Nachman thus demonstrates that a number of factors are involved in the process of redemption. It is not enough to wait passively for the Messiah, for he is in fact inactive at certain critical stages. The conclusion of the story, the happy end, is symbolic of the restitution of order and harmony at all levels of the reestablishment of eternal values. That's huge. The major role in bringing this about is played by the Shekinah, the Knesset Israel. However, the contribution of the common folk, the life and deeds of each individual Jew is an essential factor. Yeah, living a proper life is important, and hopefully, B'nai Noach, as we grow ourselves, hopefully it challenges Israelis to make sure their lives are on the right track and they're being the people who they are supposed to be. Pretty profound story. Well, I think on that note, we can stop there for today, and we will come back tomorrow, and we'll have another story, the king's son and the son of the maid. I hope you folks are enjoying this. This is very profound writing and explanation, and I think that it's just like light bulbs going off in my mind anyways. And yeah, hopefully you're enjoying this as much as I am, and I can just see how the tales of Rabbi Nachman are just such a profound, yeah, for being written nearly 300 years ago. Yeah, still hold such deep meaning, and hopefully you find some food for thought and some inspiration to draw closer to Hashem. And on that note, I think we'll sign out for today, but we will be back tomorrow and continue on from there. So till then, have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye for now.